no result from the talks. Where does it leave this situation?
Thanks so much for having me, Danica. And yes, both sides are going to say that the talks were useful, primarily because they spent 8 hours trying to understand one another's positions. But the most important thing to understand is that the entering argument on either side are really immovable at this point. And that's why I think both sides are trying to lower expectations that there is going to be any agreement. The primary Russian demand is that NATO agrees that Ukraine and Georgia will never be a part of NATO. And of course, the US has said that the NATO open door policy to allow other countries to enter is fundamental. So that can't change. So what the US is trying to do with Wendy Sherman as the lead negotiator, a very experienced negotiator, is trying to put things on the table like the intermediate range nuclear treaty or limitations on the number of troops allowed to be involved in military exercises, smaller things that they could actually progress. Because I think both sides recognize the bigger picture, not much movement is going to be made this week. It's more posturing on the Russian side to try to give lots of speeches about how they want to sort of, in some people's words, turn back the clock to the late 90s when NATO was a smaller presence.
Yeah, not an ideal situation. What are the global implications of this standoff, do you think?
Well, there's two big ones, and I'd like to use, because a lot of people are making Cold War analogies right now. So one of the big implications is a reminder that Russia and the EU have an enormous trade partnership. For Russia, 1/3 of its imports and 1/3 of its exports, up to about 200 billion euro, are with EU trade. And don't forget that Nord Stream 2, an enormous pipeline going from Russia straight into Europe, is ready to go. It's actually could double the amount of natural gas that Russia would put into Europe. So compared to the Cold War, when only 5% of imports and exports from the USSR at the time were with Europe, this is just a completely different story. Being able to make ultimatums like there were during the Cold War are very difficult. So it's going to be a much more intricate question. Now, the question going forward the next few weeks are, would Russia actually benefit from any kind of real military incursion? Right now, Putin holds all the cards. He could say, I am not going to invade, and then he could look sort of magnanimous if he backs off. But there's a physical issue here, which is he only has about 3 months of where the ground is cold enough in that region in order to have tanks progress. Otherwise, he hit the muddy season and he'd have to back off. So there's a reason that he's done this specific timing. And finally, I would say that the whole world is looking at China and Russia and strategic competition. This is what that looks like. And Australia should take note because, of course, we have neighbors here in the region that are causing tensions to be risen. And Australia should take note about what alliances look like when they're backing each other during talks like this when tensions are high.
Absolutely. I'm sure that they're looking at it very closely. Jason Israel, we're short on time today. We have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Danica.